on August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped a single atomic bomb, which was small and crude by today's standards, on Hiroshima, and indiscriminately incinerated tens of thousands of children, women and men in an instant. And over 90% of the doctors and nurses in Hiroshima were killed or injured by the bomb. And 3 days later, as you know, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. And by the end of that year, 240,000 people were dead. And the survivors were, of course, condemned to live their lives in fear of radiation-induced cancers. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren continued to face increased risks of health effects caused by genetic damage. And today, after all this time, nearly 15,000 nuclear weapons, most of them are an order or multiple orders of magnitude more powerful than those bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And over 90% of those bombs are held by two states, the U.S. and Russia. These weapons continue to pose an intolerable threat to all of humanity and the entire biosphere. But today, there really is hope. On July 7th, just a month ago, 2017, 122 non-nuclear nations endorsed the UN treaty that, when it is ratified, will bind signatories never to develop, test, produce, manufacture, acquire, stockpile, transfer, use, or threaten to use nuclear weapons. Endorsing nations pledge not to station, install, or deploy these massively lethal bombs. While we don't talk about it hardly at all in this country, at least 140-some nations have been involved in producing this treaty. The treaty establishes humanitarian and human rights for those that have been victims of nuclear weapons or weapons testing, including the right to live in an environment that has been remediated from the damage done by them. The deadliness of these weapons is a gift that just keeps on giving to all of us and our environment. And we tend to forget about the downwinders and the nuclear vets and the people who live in various communities across this country that are severely polluted by these weapons. And once 50 nations have signed and ratified, it becomes law 90 days later. The prohibition on threatening to use nuclear weapons sets up a fundamental challenge to all policies based on nuclear deterrence, which has been the philosophy that we have used to justify our maintenance of these arsenals of doomsday omnicidal weapons. From now on, deterrence advocates are on the wrong side of the law, on the wrong side of our moral values as a world, as a planet, as understood and accepted by the majority of countries in the world. Nuclear-armed nations will go from being seen as strong global leaders to pariah nations, to the rogue nations whose actions the rest of the world condemns. This is no small thing. This is what we call soft diplomacy. You begin to make the holders of these weapons feel that they're not doing something quite as glorious as they once thought. Our job, all of our job, and our friends and our neighbors' job, is to begin to talk about this, to let the people in this country know that the rest of the world says, no, the time is now to get rid of these. We have been lucky so far. They have not been used, but the dangers of their use grow all the time, and the dangers of an accidental exchange grow all the time. We have to step back from the brink of omnicide. We have to say no more.
These are interesting times. Matt Taibbi of Rolling Stone magazine, one of my favorite writers, he noted that about 10 years ago on the campaign trails, as he covered presidential campaigns, that he noticed something was happening in the United States. It was pretty clear that our political system was corrupt, that money was buying the Republicans and Democrats, and they were writing laws and governing on behalf of the 1%. But he also noticed something different. He noticed that the people of the United States were also noticing this dynamic. And they were also noticing sort of this triad of the Republicans and the Democrats and corporate media. But he said then, in typical United States fashion, people ran away from their corrupt leaders and corrupt system and now find themselves hostage to any conspiracy theory or anything that's sort of out there. We really need to run to and engage in the issues of our day, because we are living in a changing world. I kept coming across a phrase, especially in journals around the world, in European newspapers, and it was, Angela Merkel is the leader of the free world. Actually has a pretty nice ring to it. So I think my message today is the world is moving on. The day after this administration pulled out of the climate treaty, China and the European Union met. Germany is moving rapidly to a fossil fuel-free economy. A number of Scandinavian countries are on the brink of doing so or have done so. So I want to give this message of hope that whatever we're seeing in the United States, many people around the world are moving on, and I think in many ways they're moving on in the same direction that everybody here tonight is moving in the 122 countries that signed on for a world without nuclear weapons. The world is moving on. So I just want to give this message of hope that I think all of us here stand in communion with the overwhelming majority of the 7.5 billion people in the world, the 122 nation states that are calling for a world without nuclear weapons and that are working for that, and those other nation states that will sign on.